On Irongate Street in Steamtown is a beautiful house that has sat empty for too long. Rumor has it that a famous explorer has recently leased the house and will be moving in shortly. The residents of the town are full of anticipation as gossip flies around town as they try to guess who the new resident will be. This tutorial is the first in a series covering the construction and furnishing of a two-story house. I'll start by constructing the house and adding the basic architectural details. Future tutorials will cover furnishing the rooms and other exterior elements. I want to kick this part off with talking about the house kit, the main structure. And what I've done is I've temporarily taped it together so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like and the different components with it all together. Now, the front is where you're going to see the window cutouts, and that is one long piece. And then each of the sides, both sides are also one long piece, and they do not have any windows in them. And the reason I did that with this design is with only having 3 walls, if you had real windows on every wall, then you would not have a lot of wall space. So instead, what I will be doing is creating some faux windows on the side. So from the outside, it'll look like it's a window, or you can also make it look like it's a window from the inside wherever you want it, but there won't be actual cutouts. And then if I turn this around the middle, you've got the 3 long pieces that are each side. And then if I look at the middle, you've got the top piece, the middle floor, and then the base. So it's just a few pieces to put this together. Now, in addition to the kit of this chipboard thing, it comes also with the facade, the window facades that you'll need. And you've got this window here. This will be the 2 side windows. And you see you've got 3 pieces. So you've got the panes. And what's nice about the panes being split is you could hinge them to the side and actually open them if you wanted. Then you also have over here, you've got the door piece. And you'll notice there's already fretwork cut in here. So the door comes up like this. And then the actual door piece is right here. And then the top is really cool because it's a balcony. So just like the smaller windows down below, you get the trim, and then you get the 2 doors here that open, and then you have this this main piece that is the balcony that comes out the front. So that's very cool. Then separately, you can also get a roof, and this roof has been sized to fit this piece, which you just set on the top. And another thing that I'll mention, but this is separate, another thing I'll mention is that you could always, with this thing, you could put multiples next to each other if you wanted to. Another option with the roof would be to leave off one of these sides. If you wanted to, you could leave that side off, and then you would have a space on the back side of this like you do for the other floors, like, you know, maybe a low attic or something like that if you wanted it. And then, like I say, there's going to be separate kits if you want to have more add-on windows to the sides. In starting the construction of the house, I first began by prepping some paintwork on the openings, the balconies, the windows, and the doors. I've decided to use, it looks kind of black in the images here, but it's actually kind of a charcoal gray. I chose that because it will match the roof tiles, and I just kind of like the color scheme that I've come up with. So I want to just make sure that all those inside edges are that color before I start doing anything else. And then if you look at number 2, the paper I'm going to be using on the outside is this really cool embossed paper. So it has dimension to it. The bricks pop out and the grout lines are recessed. And this is scaled 1/12, which works perfectly for this project. And the other nice thing is each end has interlocking bricks. So as you use one paper and then add another piece of that paper, those bricks just interlock nicely. So you get a really good finished look, and you don't get this like seam. So I like that. It's pretty cool. And then I've also got the measurements of the paper. So it's 12.5 inches tall by 18 3/4 inches wide. Now for this project, I ended up using 4 of these sheets. I had a lot left over, but in order to lay it out so all the bricks interlocked and I got the best look, that worked the best. But like I say, I did have a lot left over. I'm going to be doing more with this, so that wasn't an issue for me. And I could also see you adding some things that I didn't add, like a chimney and things like that, that you could use up more of this paper. But, you know, you could, there's nothing that says that you can't, you know, not worry so much about the interlocking and getting that all lined up and just do your own piecing and maybe be more efficient with the paper and not need to use as much as I did. Now, the first thing I had to do is you've got this fretwork area, and I had to deal with that because there's no way to cut that out, that area out, after you glue the brickwork on. At least I don't have the skill to do that. So what I did at first is I just simply laid the front piece out on top of the sheet of paper and just kind of used a pencil to sort of mark, give me some idea of the shape of that so that I would know how to cut it out. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect because you've got all that, you've got all the trim work that's going to go on top of these openings. So you do have a lot of latitude with your cutting and whatnot because all that stuff's going to get hidden. Now, what I decided to do in terms of applying the paper is that I decided to center the front of the house in the middle of the paper. So I didn't start it on the corner, but I actually centered it, and then I was going to wrap the edges around, and then it'll be the sides where I put the next pieces and interlock the bricks. If you want to do the corner, fine. I just thought it would have a better look and a cleaner look if I didn't have any seaming as much as possible on the front of this. Now you can see in the first image I've glued it down, and I've used an X-Acto knife to cut out the windows and the balcony window and the door, and I'd already cut away the area behind the fretwork, so it was already gone before I put the paper on, as I showed you in the steps before. And the second picture, you can see everything from the flip side, and you can see probably better here where the paper's been cut away from the fretwork, and you can see how it's kind of ragged, but it doesn't matter. It was an estimation because all those edges will be covered up. And of course, before you glue this on, you could always use the trim work to lay it down there and just make sure that you've cut enough away so that the enough of the fretwork and the chipboard around it is exposed, so you don't have brickwork. You're not going to have any brickwork sticking out. And then you can see now, you know, there's a little bit of rawness in cutting it, but again, you're going to cover all that up. The other thing that I did was I went back in and I painted the edges of all those openings, because even though I painted the chipboard with that charcoal gray, you still have the edge of the paper, which is white. So I didn't want that to show. So I just went in with a paintbrush and just touched all that up and made sure that there was not going to be any white exposed when the windows and all were put together. Now, the other thing you need to worry about in removing paper from the front, in addition to the windows and doors, is the slots that are going to be used to attach the balcony. And you've got two slots, one on each side of the window, and then you've got a series of slots underneath the window. And that's where, like, the tongues of the balcony are going to slide in and attach the balcony to the underneath the window. So before you do anything else, the next step will be just to take an X-Acto knife and remove those areas, and then of course test your balcony and make sure that it's going to fit in there nicely. At this point, it's probably a good point to talk about the digital image set that I've come up with to go along with this project. The items in this are sized for this project, but of course they could be used for lots of 1/12 scale projects, and as decorative elements too on other bits of artwork. So you're going to see me from this point forward using a lot of the things that you see in this, and it includes all kinds of pediments and moldings, crown moldings, window trims, little decorative pieces, tin tiles that you could use, either ceiling or floor tiles, doors, just all kinds of little architectural bits and bobs that could be used to decorate a house. Now that I've got the paper attached, the brick paper attached to the front of the center section, I'm now going to flip it over and do the inside paper. For me, I think it's easier to paper the inside of the house before actually assembling it. You may have experience and you like it differently, but it just seems like I can get to things easier. So that's what I did. I started with the downstairs, and at the very top of the room, the wall is going to be the brick paper that you see. And I ran that paper, it's glued right up to the edge of the slots. Now those slots are the slots that where the ceiling of the first floor, which is also the floor of the second floor, will slip into. So I need to leave those free. So I did that all the way up to there. And then I used pieces of the paneling from the digital kit that I showed you before to panel each side of the walls on each side of the door. And they are sized to fit this. So they will fit between the door, each side of the door, and they'll also fit on the other side walls. Then, of course, you cover that wall with paper, and you're also covering up the side slots that are used to attach each side wall to the front. So if you look at the last picture at the bottom, I've only glued that paper right to the front piece. So if you flip it over, so now you've got the brick side facing up and you've got the brick and paneling facing down, you can lift the side of the brick paper and get in there and cut away, using an X-Acto knife, cut away all the pieces of paneling and brick paper that are overlapping those slots. Next, I moved on to papering the second floor. And I've used a combination of papers. The first one is a distress type paper. It's a new line called Chesterville. And you'll see me using several papers from this line in this project. And it's double-sided, so that's nice. You get a choice of different patterns. And then also I'm using this other paper, kind of a floral burgundy paper. It has sort of a rustic feel to it. And those burgundy colors go well with some of the coloring that's in the rustic paper. And here I'm using the two different papers, one on top of the other, because I'm going to be doing some chair railing to go around the room, as well as crown molding and molding for the floor. And then note here, you get a good view of what it looks like after you cut away the paper from the tabs. So here, look at how the paper has been removed from the slots. It's not covering those. There's no paper covering the tab part. And then with the top floors, you also have to make sure that you're not covering anything at the top where the roof is going to go, or in the ceiling of the room. So again, there's tabs up there where that piece will be connected. So again, make sure that you're not covering anything that that could prevent you from putting the tabs in those grooves. But also notice, you don't have to cut away the front paper. That stays there because that won't block. And in fact, that gives you a good extra glue point when you're going to be adding the other pieces. Now to paper the inside sidewalls, what I've done is lay the two sidewalls next to the center wall. Now I have not glued on the brick paper. It's just laying there, and that way with the slots aligned, and then that way it can help me make sure that I've got the paper lined up evenly on the sides with the center, so that the paneling goes across in a straight line, and then up at the top it'll help me to make sure that the two different papers are completely lined up. Now also what you can see is some trim that I've added to the windows and the doors, and these come from the digital image kit, and they are sized to fit these windows, and they are in the same style as the trim on the outside. And there are two for each, two different sizes, and that is, if you want to, you can layer them, which is what I did, and it gave it a little bit more dimension. So for instance, if you look up at the top window where the balcony is going to be, it is I've got one on top of the other, and I think that just gives it a little bit more dimension. Or you could just use the smaller one and not, if for some reason you wanted more wall space. And then of course the door is the same way. You've got that molding to go around the door and finish it, and the molding to go around the windows and finish it. Once I got all the paper on the inside, on the three pieces, the two sides and the front, then I started working on the exterior window trim. Now you might be wondering, why didn't I just do that at first when I was working on the front? And the reason being is it adds bulk to the front, and I wanted the front piece to lay flat to make it easier to cut away the overlaps on tabs and things like that. So, but now that I've got the inside all papered, I don't care so much about the bulk anymore, and so now I'm going to go ahead and add the trim. Now, if you look at the picture on the left, you can see how I assembled the windows, and the same applied for the doors and for the big window for the balcony at the top. The dark gray piece and then the next cream piece, those are the chipboard pieces that came with the kit. Then the third piece is an image from the digital kit, and you can see that that adds a little bit more architectural detail, and it's kind of a stone looking image, so I thought that was cool. And then you also see you've got some decorative bits to add to the top of the windows, and I give you two pieces so that first of all, I backed those little decorative pieces with some thin chipboard to make them a little bit more bulky, and then I put the one on top of the other so that that center part of that pops out. So once I got that all put together, then I attached that to the front. In looking at the fretwork, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Did I want to cover it with some kind of plastic? It didn't seem right just to leave it open. I could put decorative colored paper behind it. But what I finally decided is that I would try to make it look something like stained glass. I already knew I was going to do some kind of stained glass treatment for the door inserts, which I'll show you that further in the tutorial here. So I decided, you know what I think I could do is just fill those gaps with glossy accents, and then that would look like glass that was wedged in between the fretwork, so it would look like it was wrought iron, as opposed to if you put a piece of plastic on the top. I didn't think that looked not as nice, so I thought that gave it a really cool look. And what I did is I put it on a non-stick craft sheet, and you don't want to use wax paper because that will pick up the wax and you'll have a smoky looking glass there. So be sure to put it on something that's not going to lift anything from what you lay it on. And then I put some weight so that I made sure that that this was pressed as hard as it could be against the non-stick craft sheet, so I wouldn't get a lot of leaking underneath. And then I just began adding very, very thin layers of glossy accents, letting it dry, then adding another layer, letting it dry, and continuing. And of course, being sure to use a pen or a little piece of paper to poke or remove any bubbles that come up. And so after doing that, it took me, I think, like a day and a half. Just to be sure everything was dry in between each step. And you can see at the bottom, you get that kind of stained glass look where you can see through it, but you get that kind of mottled look. Almost like what you see when you see like glass block that you see a lot of times in showers or in bathroom windows. In terms of the stone trims that you see, in addition to the moldings that I've already talked about that go around the windows and doors, I have used a couple other trims that are in the digital kit. There are lots of trims, but these are the ones that I specifically used for this sample. And you can see pictures of each of the trims. The top trim went at the very top of the second story, right under the roof. Then there's the middle trim and then the bottom trim, and they're all just a slightly different size. And then each of the trims is 6 inches long, and the reason I did it that way is because I know a lot of people don't have the ability to print larger on larger pieces of paper, 12 by 12, something like that. So I had to keep them in a size that no one would have any trouble printing them. And since the distance, the measurements of each of the pieces, the front and the sides, would require printing something larger, I just came up with a way to break it up. And then I think that it also worked well because then I could incorporate these keystones that that you see there that are dimensional, just like I used on the windows. And then that's just a way for you to connect the individual pieces. and also to, you know, add a lot of detail to it. And then you also see a picture over there. I just happen to have that. I was testing I haven't added the balcony yet, but I'm just testing it to make sure that it still fits in all the holes. And then of course you can see the trim on the top and the bottom, and you can see the use of those keystones. And then in the very corner you can see the bottom trim, and I've actually used a piece of the bottom trim to go over the corner just to kind of pull together where the two pieces of molding meet. Now the kit comes with a piece of chipboard that you can use for the door. I chose not to use that because I want to incorporate a stained glass element, which I'm going to walk you through how to do that. Also, I want to point out that to make the door more dimensional, I used components of the door and created another layer. Those elements that you see in the middle here, both the trim for the little cutout areas and then the panels and then the other two plates, those all come in the digital kit. So if you want to give it that extra dimension. I also sandwiched that the stained glass effect looking material in between two doors. So I actually did two doors that are glued together, and I'll show you a little bit more about how I did that. I also want you to note that I've got a little knocker, a lion knocker and doorknob, and those they weren't that color, but I got this copper thing going on, so I just added some paint to make those a copper color, and those two items are carried by Alpha Stamps. Now the things you'll need to create a stained glass effect, first of all you'll need an image, and the image that I used, I have that available for you on my blog that you can download, and of course, as in all my videos, I always have the link to my blog in the description area on YouTube so that it's easy for you to go directly to my blog post that relates to this video. Now you also need a transparency film for inkjet printers, and that is because you need something that will stand up to the heat of the printer. You're going to need a heat gun, and you're also going to need some clear embossing powder. Fine or super fine looks the best, just because you get a lot better melt. Now what you're going to do is you're going to want to print the stained glass image on the transparency. So you're going to be running this through your printer. Now I always like to print in extra just in case I mess something up. But also in this case, I actually needed two pieces of stained glass because I decided I was going to mount one piece of stained glass behind each of the doors before I put them together. You could just use one between the two doors, but because of the thickness of the walls, you know, it's not a flat thickness. It's pretty thick, so I needed to create a little bit of dimension between the front door and the back door. So I decided to print two of them. And what you want to do is be careful not to print more than you need, because if your printer's like mine, it's very slow. And for this process to work, it's important that when the piece of transparency comes out of your printer, the images still need to be wet. So you need to grab that piece of transparency with the printed items on it and immediately throw your powder on top of that. So just print exactly what you need, because mine, if I print more than just a couple of items, then the stuff that first comes out ends up drying while the rest of it's printing. Now there is a fallback. If you don't get to it fast enough, or your printer just such that it comes out and it's just not wet enough, then you can use what's called Versamark. It's a stamp pad, and it's just an adhesive stamp pad. So you can go over the image with that stamp pad and it'll put adhesive down, transparent adhesive, and then you can throw the powder on top of that. Now the next step is to use the heat gun, and the most important thing about this is to keep that heat gun constantly moving. It's really easy to cause the transparency to start to warp. So you just want to really, I'm almost shaking it fast over it, and you want to watch, and you can tell when the powder melts, because it's suddenly going to become transparent in that area. And if you're not sure, hold it up to the light and you'll see, oh yeah, there's still some of the white powder. So just keep going over it, but don't go over the same area over and over and over that's already melted, because then you will cause it to warp. Now, while I'm on this, I'll also mention that you don't even have to use images that are printed. If you have rubber stamps, you can simply stamp an image on the transparency. I would recommend using StazOn ink, and then let that dry, take your Versamark, rub it all over the transparency, and then put your powders down. And then use the heat gun. Now, even though you're not running the transparency through the printer, you do still want to use transparency film that is made for an inkjet printer. And the reason is it still has to stand up to the heat of your heat gun. And that's what's different about that kind of a transparency, is that it can handle that. So now I give you an image where you can see how the melt looked on the transparency. I'm just holding this up to the light and magnifying it so you can get an idea of how it looks. And I'll also point out one of the reasons I do like to try to do it using the printer and having it wet and then putting the powder on, as opposed to Versamark, is you just get a better melt. It just looks better. So then the next image you can see I've added some double stick tape or pop-up dots to create that dimension between the two doors. And you don't have to worry about how it looks in the middle, because when you put it in between the door frame, you can't see it. And so I just wanted you to see that that's how I separated the two. And then there's two pictures here. One, I've kind of taken the picture with some light behind it so you can see how it looks from the front with the stained glass. And then the other picture is of how the stained glass looks from the inside on the other side of the door. And you can also see I've used the same door handle on the inside as I did on the outside. Now I want to talk about the inside floors and ceilings. On the first floor, I used kind of a weathered checker pattern, and that's more of the Chesterfield papers. And then for the ceilings, I used some of the ceiling tiles that are in, the metal tiles that are in the digital kit. Now, I'm calling them metal tiles because that's what they look like, but you could use them as floor tiles too. They're 1 inch by 1 inch. And to place them on the pieces of floor, the chipboard floor, I started by finding the center point and then working my way out, just as if you were actually going to tile something for real. And then I just cut out all these little individual ones and then glued them down, and then at the bottom you could see the look that you get with all the tiles. And then in future videos I'm going to be adding lighting and that sort of thing. So this just gets the basic ceiling and floor for the first floor. Now going to the second floor, I have a wood floor instead, and again this is more of the Chesterfield papers. It's again the double-sided. You can see the one like really worn, peeling, paint-looking side, and then there's the wood side. Now the planks of this are too big, but I love the colors, and so what I did is I just cut them into strips and made them different lengths, and then put them back together again. I did the same thing, found the center point, started in the center, and just kept adding planks of wood, and the colors got mixed up, and I just think it looks really good. The one thing I'll suggest is that when you cut everything in strips, then go ahead and ink the edges so that way you don't have the white of the paper. That will look better. And then at the bottom there you see a picture of the ceiling. Again, I've used the 10 tiles to put the ceiling on, and I did it exactly the same way as I added it for the bottom floor. Next, I want to cover the trims and how to miter corners. I mitered all the corners of the trims that I used, and these wood trims were used on the second floor. And one of the tools that I use is called a miter box. It's a miniature one for crafting, and that's the exact one that I use. The Excel miter box. These are cheap. They're $16, something like that, depending on where you buy them. You can find them online. And they're nice because the blade can be replaced when it gets dull. And I use this not just for mitering, but also for cutting any kind of straight cut on wood. So it's cheap and it's convenient, and I love it. And I want to review the different slots. If you go down to the bottom left-hand corner, I say left slot, center slot, right slot. So I just want you to understand that when I start to talk about that. So you've got 2 slots that allow you to miter in 2 different directions, and then you have 1 slot that gives you a straight cut. And then one of the things I can't emphasize enough, if you look at the trim piece there, is when you cut a piece of trim that you want to miter, you always need to put the trim in the box the way you would put it on the wall. So don't put the trim flat, have it standing up like it would actually stand and be attached to the wall. And hopefully you can see what I mean. you look at the image at the upper right hand side, you see that the baseboards miter together and you see they're standing up. I cut them in that standing up in that position. If you don't, then the miter will not fit together. And then you can see the bottom picture. You can see a look of the baseboard. It's stained, it's mitered, connected in the corners. And then I think I used a vintage photo stain for the staining on all of the trim. To help you in understanding whether to cut a angled left or right, I kind of made a little cheat template here for you. This is kind of a way of looking at a flat, but you've got a back piece of trim and you've got side pieces of trim. Now, the important thing to get your miter, other than to have the trim sitting like it will be attached to the wall, is that to make two pieces go together in a nice mitered corner, each piece has to be cut at a different angle. It doesn't matter which one is cut at which angle, they just both have to be different. So if you were cutting the corner of the back wall and you wanted it to, let's say we're looking at the left side, and so we want to cut an angle on the left side of the back wall, and we want to cut an angle on the left side of the side wall, and we want the two to fit together, one has to be cut by cutting through the right slot, and the other one has to be cut from the left slot. So in this particular case, I say, okay, at the top of the back wall, I'm going to cut using the left slot of the miter box, and on the side I'm going to use the right side of the miter box. And of course the front of it, it's going to be open, so there's no angle, so that can just be cut straight across. And then you'll want to do the opposite. So if you cut on the left slot of the back wall, on the left end of it, the other end cut on the right. And so just remember that it's really, they're just opposite cuts, standing up, and the two sides will fit together. Now I'm going to walk you through actually cutting a piece that I did for the house. The first thing you need to do is to lay whatever piece of trim molding that you're going to use so that it overlaps the edge of the wall, and you want to mark exactly where it falls at the very edge of the wall. And be sure to keep into account the tabs. You don't want your trim to go over into the tab, because that tab will be gone when you put the wall pieces together. So it's just what part of the wall is going to be exposed when the walls are put together. Now, if you go ahead and put yours together before you trim it, then you don't have to worry about that, but it's harder to measure. So I like to measure before and get all my trim pieces cut before I put the walls together. So after you do that, if you look at number 2, you can see where I've made a little mark exactly where the trim, where I need to cut that trim, where it's right flush with where the wall is going to be, the edge of the wall. And you're going to do that on both ends. I've just shown you, in number 2, I'm just showing you the right end, but you're going to do that on the other side too. And you do the same thing whether it's the back or it's the sides. You just need to mark where is the edges of my wall. And then you're going to need to determine what kind of cuts you need to make. Are they flat cuts, angle cuts, what angle, right side, left side? And then you can refer back to the cheat thing that I showed you before, and getting into your mind, okay, this is what I need to cut where. And I always lay everything out so that I don't end up accidentally cutting things both the same way and they don't fit together. And then to make the cut, again, I keep emphasizing I'm standing that trim piece up, and you notice I am matching up the mark that I made with the angle, so that tells me I've got to cut it right that angle. And when you put the two together, even though that's an angle cut, the part of it that extends on each one, that will fit together. And so you just want to cut that angle right where you made your mark. Now, if it was a flat cut, then you'd be cutting the mark in the center. You would be cutting it in the center. So just figure out which one of those slots do you need to be in, and then make your cut. And then you can just insert your saw blade. It's really simple, and just cut right down, and your saw blade will go right into those slots. Now, if you get a little bit of raggedness, and sometimes these wood trims, even with a nice cutting kit like this, sometimes you'll get just a little roughness, and just take a piece of sandpaper and sand it. Now here you have examples of each of the trims that I used. The baseboard, which is the one I've been using as a sample for describing how to do the mitered cuts, and you see that in place in the far right, and then you also see the chair rail. So I went through the exact same process with the chair rail as I did the baseboard, and then at the bottom you see the crown molding, which is what's going to go on the ceiling. That's the trickiest piece, and the reason it is because there's 4 distinctive sides to that molding. There's the front that you see, there's an edge that glues to the ceiling, there is a little edge that glues where the ceiling and the wall come together, and then there's an edge that glues against the wall. So the tricky part just is to lay it out properly in your miter box so that it is in the position it would be in to attach the ceiling and to the wall at the same time. So that's the only tricky part. You just really have to make sure that you've got that in the right place because of all those different angles. Now for the roof, at the beginning when I was going over the kit, I think I showed you how the pieces fit together. It's really simple. There's 5 pieces, 2 long sides, 2 short sides, and a top. And what I did on this after I put it together, and one of the things that was very helpful is as you glue them together, I used Scotch tape because it's not bulky, and it helped keep things together while the glue was drying, and then everything got covered with paper. The top is just black paper because in a further video I'm going to be doing some additional stuff with the top of the roof. And then for the shingles, I used the paper that you see there. It comes in big sheets to cover, and I think I used 2 sheets. I did have some left over. Again, it's like the brick, you know, you may want to do something else if you got a chimney or whatnot. You've got extra to do that with. And then I thought it would be cool to do some railing. There's this railing thing going on with the windows and the balcony, and so I thought some trim work around the roof would look good. And you can see the below is the chipboard that I used, die cut chipboard. I've used this in many projects. I just have tons of it, and some of it I use the next time I use another piece. So the corner pieces are what I have used for the corners of the roof, and you do have to cut off some of the little bits of that so that they will sit right on the corners of the roof, in that they can fit together on the edge. Then also what I've done is added some windows, and I added this on all of the sides. These windows are in the digital kit, and so you've got the basic window, and again it's got that kind of wrought iron filigree kind of look to it to go with everything else. And then you have a separate piece that I put on top. That way both are backed with chipboard and then put together, and that gave dimension. And then you've got some more of the keystones so that it matches the other trims that are in the on the house. At the beginning of the tutorial, I talked about how there was an additional add-on window kit so that you could add more windows than what you just see on the front. And that's what I've done, except these windows are faux windows, and I wanted them to look realistic. So what you see on the far right is a free collage sheet that also will be on my blog for you to download, and that gives you images to put behind these windows so it looks like you're looking into the house. And on these other, you might have noticed in the other windows, some of them are open, some of them are closed. The real ones, they aren't actually attached yet because they're just sitting in place, because I'm not sure until I actually do the insides of the rooms. I don't want to limit myself as to where I place furniture and other things, so I decided just for you to see how they look, I just put them in place, but I didn't glue them. Now on the faux windows, I have glued them into place. And also to give it the glass look, I have used plastic. These sheets are made to use as faux glass, and one side is exposed, the other one has a film on it so that you can glue your window panes to it and then pull the plastic film off before you attach it to your window. And so you can just see I have the 4 windows there, and they look exactly like the front, except they've got that image in the background, and that's sized to work with those windows. You might have noticed that just like with the roof and the balcony, I have added some trim window railing around each of the windows, the real ones and the faux ones, and I have used a mini die cut set that's much like the large one that I used for the roof, except this one's smaller and it's perfect scale for these windows. And I've cut out sections of those, and to attach it I kind of wanted it to be a little bit away from the window, and that also will allow me to open the windows forward if I want to, as opposed to into the room. And that's part of what I was holding off for, deciding just to not put myself in a corner in terms of what I want to do with the interior. And to do that, if you look at the far right, I just used a couple of little rondelles, and that happened to just be the distance I wanted. So that gave me a point to connect this little railing to the windows, but it also allowed me to pop out, give a little distance between that railing and the window itself. Now, another element that I decided I wanted was the stone trim that you see on the corners. And I also used the same kind of trim technique to trim around the balcony, the sides of the balcony, and then underneath. And it was really hard to get the balcony in place with the paper and all, and not to see a little bitty edge underneath the balcony. So I thought this was a great solution, and I liked also the design element that it added. And the way to create those is I used another piece of the Chesterville, and it just so happened that this paper fits very well with all of the stone trim images. The color scheme really matches well with the stone images in the digital kit that I've used for trimming out all the other things. And what I did is I cut two different kinds of strips, one that was 1 inch wide and another that was 3/4 inch wide. That gave me the two different widths of the stone pieces. And then each piece, whether it was 1 inch strip or a 3/4 strip, I cut all those into 1 inch pieces. So you get a pile of 1 by 1 and you get a pile of 3 1/4 by 1. And then I just started gluing those along the edge. Now, before I did that, I did ink the edges of the stone, one to get rid of the white, and also just to make each stone stick out. And then, of course, the stones around the balcony are not bent, but I alternated both on the sides and underneath and around the balcony. I alternated the different sizes of stone pieces. And you'll also note in the middle there, I've got a close-up there of the balcony. I had to do a little bit of trimming because of the little lip that goes underneath the railing part of the balcony. So I just had to cut a little snip out of there just to make sure that that one stone fit. This concludes the first part of the multi-part series. In the next video, I'll be decorating and furnishing the first floor. The decor will be steampunk themed. If that's not your thing, I still think you might find some value in some of the techniques that I'll be using and some of the furnishings that would work for other styles. As always, hop over to my blog for pictures, the supply list, information on the new DigiKit, and the free inside window view collage sheet, the stained glass image, and the miter cornered help sheet. If you're already on my blog, then you're there. Otherwise, if you're on YouTube watching this, the link for the post that has all that information will be in the description area. I'll be back in a couple weeks.